Historians of Reddit, what is the strangest chain of events you have studied? Hello and welcome to Robots Reading Reddit. I'll try to drop a bunch of links in the description of this video, so you can deep dive into a topic, if you find it interesting. We learnt about this at school. In the 1950s in Borneo they were suffering from an outbreak of malaria, so, with the help of the World Health Organization, they sprayed DDT all over the island to kill the mosquitoes. But the DDT also killed the island's wasps, which helped control the population of thatch-eating caterpillars. Thatch that people's homes were made of, and thanks to this, their roofs began to collapse. Many other small insects started to get affected by the DDT, which were eaten by geckos. The geckos developed a tolerance to the DDT, but the cats who ate the geckos didn't, and the cat population started to die off. This led to the island's rat population increase greatly. And that's the story of how an island with a malaria problem led to cats being airdropped into Borneo. Zehnggou Canal. So, the Han heard that Jin were fond of mega projects and massive infrastructure investments, so they found a hydraulics engineer and sent him over to sell them on an absurd canal idea: build a massive canal to use runoff water from two flood-prone rivers to irrigate worthless plains. Tame the river's flooding, irrigate wasteland, everybody wins. And in the Han's schemes, it's an absurdly large project that will keep the Jin diverted and invested for decades. And it does. Except about halfway through, the Jin caught onto this and confront their hydraulics engineer, Zehnggou, presumably confronted with whatever creative thing or things they do to spies and saboteurs, throws himself on Jin mercy. Yeah, I'm a spy. Yeah, it was to sabotage your efforts, but I'm really an engineer, guys, and this will really work, honest. Let me finish it, and please don't do that thing with the cheese grater. The kin, presumably, conclude they can always torture him to death later, and let him remain in charge of the project. And wonder of wonders, it works. Thousands of hectares of rich, but fallow desert are turned into fertile farmland. Existing farmland is made safer by giving the flooding rivers runoff channels. The canal makes the Jin rich beyond their already immense wealth, which they turn to larger armies, eventually crushing the Han and, briefly, uniting China. Pretty much the fall of the Berlin Wall. The USSR was already crumbling by this point, and so they agreed to allow the wall to be opened for a bit. Well, the guy in charge over in Berlin didn't really get the point across to the public very well, and as a result everyone assumed that the wall was permanently coming down. This led to pretty much all of East Berlin flocking to the wall and demanding to be let through. The guards there knew there was no way to restrain all these people without a massacre occurring, and the Russian government had no real way of easily fixing the huge mistake. And so the Berlin Wall fell, all because of misinterpretation. The events that led and culminated in the War of the Bucket for sure. Essentially one Italian state who followed the Holy Roman Emperor stole a bucket from another Italian state who followed the Pope. War broke out. The papal state highly outnumbered the HRE state, but HRE state won. Then stole another bucket. Was a trip for sure when I learned about this one. British officers in India in the 18th century were eating quinine powder to help treat malaria. Quinine is so bitter on its own, so they started putting it in their club soda to make it easier to down. They invented tonic water, brought the water back to Europe, and they started putting it in their gin. Hence, gin and tonic. In 1918, British MP Noel Pemberton Boleyn caused a major scandal when he accused actress Maud Allen and Margaret Asquith, wife of the previous Prime Minister, of being at the center of a homosexual ring sabotaging the war effort. Evidence included Allen having performed in a play by Oscar Wilde, and Asquith having attended the performance. He presented his case in an article entitled The Cult of the Clitoris, in which he claimed the exiled Prince of Albania had a black book listing all the blackmailed homosexuals in Britain. Maud Allen, who was in fact homosexual, Asquith was not, sued for libel, but lost. During the trial, one witness claimed to have seen the Albanian prince's black book and claimed that the judge's name was in it. Recent history, but it still boggles my mind. Jeri Ryan gets cast on Star Trek, Voyager as 7 of 9. Jeri Ryan divorces her husband. Her ex-husband, Jack, with a really strong resume and a lot of money, announces a Senate campaign in the state of Illinois in 2004. His entry in the race is enough that it is now considered a toss-up. Because both Jerry and Jack are public figures, journalists push for their divorce records to be released, and a major factor in their split was Jack's desire to have sex in public locations. Jack Ryan drops out, and the GOP struggles to find a replacement. This leads to an overwhelming victory from the Democratic challenger, Barack Obama. The entire Obama presidency exists because some writers in the 90s wanted a big titty bald girl in their show. It goes deeper. The original intent was to cast a man, as producers planned to replace unpopular character Harry Kim. However, People magazine goes out and names Kim Zak to Garrett Wang one of their sexiest people. Producers, hoping that will make more women tune in, instead write off female character Kez, and they cast a woman for 7 of 9. Obama became president because People magazine thought Garrett Wang was sexy. Probably how Pepsi briefly became the 6th largest military in the world. In 1959, President Eisenhower wanted to show the Soviet Union how great America was, so the government set up an American National Exhibition and sent Vice President Nixon there. Well, Nixon and Soviet leader Khrushchev got in an argument over communism versus capitalism. As it got heated, the president of Pepsi stepped in and was like, "Bro Khrushchev, chill out, have a Pepsi." Khrushchev must have loved that shit, because then the Soviet Union wanted to permanently bring Pepsi over to their country. The problem is that their money wasn't accepted throughout the world. Instead, like true Russians, the Soviet Union traded vodka for Pepsi. This was all good until the late 1980s, when their contract was going to expire, and vodka wouldn't cut it for payment. So instead they traded Pepsi for submarines and warships for $3 billion worth of Pepsi. Sadly, instead of terrorizing the seas and shooting harpoons at their enemies, Pepsi decided to sell the fleet to a Swedish scrap metal company. The British government wanted to get rid of the cobras in India, so they started offering money for dead cobras. To take advantage of this, many people started breeding cobras to kill for the money, so they stopped buying dead cobras once they realized it was going on. All of the cobra breeders released the snakes, and there ended up being even more cobras than there had been in the first place. The immovable ladder. Guy leaves ladder leaning against wall of the Church of the Holy Sepulchre in Jerusalem sometime before 1728. Or thing called the status quo happens in 1757, which means don't touch stuff on holy sites. Ladder is still there. Nixon created a chain of events that I find hard to believe. So in 1968 Lyndon Johnson is president. He's a Democrat, and the Democrats are having issues. The party is majorly split up between segregation issues, and they hate the Vietnam War that the country is stuck in. Nixon starts promising to end the draft, and he also proclaimed that he had a plan to end the war. Just before the election that year, on Halloween, a Thursday, LBJ gets on the news and declares that the war is almost over and peace is at hand. The North Vietnamese were participating in peace talks, and all war activity had been suspended. They left the peace talks because Nixon himself told them that if they kept the war going for one extra week, he would offer them a better deal once he was in power. So by Saturday, the North Vietnamese had walked out of the peace talks, and the war was back on. The election on the next Tuesday went to Nixon, but barely. The war continued for another 5 years, and in that time 15,000 Americans died, as well as who knows how many Vietnamese. LBJ knew about it at the time, because he had wiretapped the South Vietnamese ambassador as well as several others, and felt he could not reveal the extent of the wiretapping that Americans were guilty of, even if it meant Nixon got away with treason. As an addendum, a pilot who had been shot down and captured in 1967 would be spending the election in a POW camp, while the US representative sabotaged the Paris Peace Accords on behalf of Nixon. As a result of Nixon and the negotiators' actions, the pilot would spend 5 more years in that POW camp, where he was brutally tortured, and the United States would spend enough money to have educated an entire generation from K to PhD achieving nothing. When the pilot returned, he would marry the heiress to a beer distribution fortune after his first marriage ended due to him cheating on his first wife. The connections and backing granted by the dynasty he was now married into enabled a successful bid for a seat in the House of Representatives in 1982. He would go on to serve in both chambers of government until dying from brain cancer in 2018. At his funeral, none other than Henry Kissinger, the 1968 national security advisor who poisoned the Paris peace accords and directly prolonged his suffering, eulogized former US Senator John McCain. As a boxing historian, probably the story of an ancient Greek boxer named Cleomedes apparently won in the Olympic final. He killed his opponent by stabbing his fingers into his opponent's chest, killing him, which means he loses due to a strange and awesome rule that was, if your opponent was killed in the fight, he automatically won. So despite surviving the fight, Cleomedes is judged the loser. No glory or olive wreath. Returns home to Astypalaia and lapses into deep depression. Commits the first mass murder of schoolchildren after punching a support beam so hard the school fell down. All the kids die. Angry mob forms to kill Cleomedes, who takes shelter in a giant chest in the temple of Athena. Townsfolk storm the temple and try to pry open the chest, end up having to rip it apart board by board. But when they got it open there was nothing in it. Naturally the people didn't know what to make of it. So they sent people to the oracle of Delphi, who declared that Cleomedes was the last true Astypalaian, and that he be worshipped as a demigod. That is how an Olympic boxer became a deity of fertility, after murdering a ton of kids. I remember how King Henry I was returning to England. He allowed his only legitimate son, next in line for the crown, his half-brother and sister, and a bunch of really important people, to ferry back with the guy, who offered to sail the king back, while the king went back on his own. After they all get drunk, the boat crashes, and only some random survived. This caused a civil war between England and Normandy for 18 years, 1135 to 1153. According to Wikia, chroniclers describe this as a period in which Christ and his saints were asleep. The white collars from the port case in Peru, that is still ongoing. It has landed former presidents, current political power holders and many public servants in jail. Many congressmen and women are shaking, knowing they will be next, once their parliamentary immunity runs off. Thing is, one day two idiot drug dealers decided to have a shootout in the streets of Callao, which is a port city, embedded inside Lima, the country's capital city. The place is highly contested by drug dealers, since the port facilities are the main exit point for large drug shipments. Obviously, this being Peru, everything is corrupt as F. So a small, but brave and honest, group of police officers and district attorneys start investigating this shootout and casually obtain wiretap judge orders for the suspects of the drug dealing organization. Lo and behold, a lot of judges and politicians were in the payroll of these drug dealers. But that was not the funny part. That would be the fact that the wiretapping orders were expanded, and in the end they ended up finding out the top judges in the country did favors in exchange for ridiculous things. One of them asked for an iPhone for her daughter and tickets to see the national soccer team play. This guy also was asked to let a guy walk free who had forced himself on a 14-year-old girl, and his response was, "What do you want? Reduced sentence? Go free." He can be heard on the audio discussing how much rape did the girl get, and speaking of it as if it was nothing. These top judges control which judge gets sent to which court. Obviously, most of our politicians, being real corrupt, have lots of ongoing court cases. No surprise to find among the recordings that these top judges negotiated with a lot of politicians to arrange favors. This has caused a chain reaction of people being investigated and jailed, politicians and members of the justice system. It has confirmed what everyone suspected for years, that the justice system in Peru only works if you have money and or know people inside. Also, bonus track, some journalists have been linked to these corruption rings, thanks to these audios. Currently the Congress, which is the most corrupt and useless one in decades, is scrambling to keep the judges accused of corruption from going to prison, while keeping the president from making reforms by obstructing laws. Everyone and their mothers are ducking for cover, because they know that the evidence against them is mounting so damn fast that the usual tactics no longer work for these politicians. So, thanks to this, and the Odebrecht/Lava Jato case, we might finally find some justice for these corrupt politicians that have been treating us like idiots for the past 30 years. And all because two idiot drug dealers wanted to see who had the biggest dick by shooting each other. That's it for today. Take care of each other.